Ex left me when I went broke. I'm not staying with a loser. I rebuilt my life, bought a $5 million home, she begged me to take her back. Story 1. My name is Bram, and about 10 years ago, I was living what I thought was the dream. I'm from Denver, Colorado, and I was the co-founder of a tech startup that dealt with cybersecurity. We weren't some giant company, but we were doing really well. I was pulling in around $400,000 a year, and at 28, I felt invincible. That's also when I met Rowena. She was everything I thought I wanted: smart, gorgeous, confident. She had long auburn hair, sharp green eyes, and a presence that could make everyone else in the room disappear. She had this way of making me feel like I was the center of the universe. I met her at a charity event my business partner dragged me to, and from the second we started talking, we hit it off. Within 6 months, she moved into my place in downtown Denver, and within 2 years, we were engaged. At that time, my life felt perfect. I had the money, the woman, the career. But as you've probably guessed, that didn't last. In 2018, my company hit a wall. The market shifted, a couple of major contracts fell through, and then the market crash hit. I tried everything to keep things afloat, but the business was bleeding money. Investors started pulling out, clients stopped signing deals, and my co-founder eventually threw in the towel. By the end of that year, my company was gone, and so was most of my savings. I went from being a guy who had a luxury downtown condo and a 6-figure car to selling everything I could just to stay afloat. I moved into a tiny 1-bedroom apartment in Aurora, ate instant noodles, and started taking whatever freelance IT work I could get just to survive. At first, Rowena was supportive, or at least she pretended to be. But that didn't last long. I noticed the shift in her attitude almost immediately. She started making little comments, like, maybe if you hadn't taken so many risks, we wouldn't be in this mess, or, I didn't think I'd have to downgrade my life when I said yes to marrying you. Those little jabs turned into full-blown arguments. She'd yell about how she was tired of eating cheap food or how embarrassing it was to drive a 10-year-old car instead of the brand new Audi she was used to. One night, after a particularly nasty fight, she dropped the bomb: "I'm not staying with a loser." I'll never forget that moment. I just sat there, stunned. I tried to explain to her that I was doing everything I could to get back on my feet, but she didn't care. She packed up her stuff that night and left. She didn't even bother to say goodbye in person. She left a note on the kitchen counter that said, "I can't do this anymore. I hope you figure things out." I was devastated. It wasn't just the breakup, it was everything. Losing my company, losing my money, and now losing the woman I thought I was going to marry. For a while, I was stuck in this pit of self-pity. I'd sit in my crappy apartment, staring at the ceiling, wondering how the hell my life had gotten to this point. But at some point, I hit a breaking point. I realized I could either stay down and let life crush me, or I could claw my way back up. And that's exactly what I decided to do. The first couple of years were brutal. I worked nonstop, taking on any freelance job I could find. Coding, consulting, fixing crappy old systems for small businesses, whatever paid the bills. I barely slept, barely ate, and poured every penny I made into rebuilding my career. Eventually, things started to turn around. In 2020, I landed a contract with a mid-sized bank in Boulder. They were losing money left and right due to cybersecurity issues, and they hired me to fix it. I worked my ass off for them, and within 6 months, I turned their system around completely. That project became my foot in the door, word started spreading, and suddenly, I wasn't just a struggling freelancer, I was in demand. By 2022, I'd started another company, but this time, I did it differently. I kept things small and steady. I didn't blow money on fancy offices or risky ventures. I focused on providing solid, reliable services, and it worked. My company grew steadily, and by the end of that year, we were valued at $50 million. I didn't just rebuild my life, I made it better than it had ever been. And to celebrate, I bought myself a house. Not just any house, either. A $5 million mansion in Cherry Hills Village. It's got everything: a home theater, a pool, a wine cellar, and views that still take my breath away. For the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe again. Life was good. And then, out of nowhere, Rowena came crawling back. It started with a text message. "Hey, Bram. Long time no see. I hope you're doing well." I stared at it for a while, not sure how to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore her, but another part of me was curious. So I didn't reply. Then another message came a few days later. "I saw your name in the news. Congrats on the new company. I always knew you'd make it big." Still, I ignored it. But the third message? That one got to me. "I miss you. Can we talk?" I wasn't sure if I wanted to open that door again, but curiosity won out. I agreed to meet her at a cafe downtown. When I walked in, she was already there, sitting at a corner table. She looked just as beautiful as ever, but there was something different about her. She looked tired, worn out, desperate. The second I sat down, she launched into her story. Life hadn't been kind to her since we split. She'd bounced from one failed relationship to another, struggled to keep a steady job, and was now drowning in debt. Meanwhile, she'd seen my name in Forbes and decided to reach out, hoping we could reconnect. She didn't even try to hide her intentions. "I made a mistake leaving you," she said, tears in her eyes. "I thought I was doing the right thing at the time, but I've regretted it every day since. Can we start over?" I just stared at her, not sure if I should laugh, cry, or flip the table. Here was the woman who had abandoned me when I was at my lowest, now begging me to take her back because I'd rebuilt my life. Story 2. I grew up in Buffalo, New York. Our family wasn't rich, but we weren't struggling either. Dad worked as a machinist, and Mom was a school nurse. They were good people who did their best to raise us right. I'm Dale, the oldest by 4 years, and then there's Zara. She was the baby of the family and always got the most attention. I was the responsible one, Zara was the fun one, always finding ways to bend the rules. But what she did last year was beyond anything I could have imagined. It started last summer. I've been living in my own house for about 10 years. It's nothing fancy, a 2-bedroom in the suburbs, but it's mine. My 14-year-old son, Max, and I live there, and I was planning to do some renovations to make it more comfortable. I applied for a home equity line of credit, HELOC, confident it would be a quick approval. My finances were in good shape, my credit score was solid, and I've always been careful about money. Then came the shock. The bank called to say my application was denied because of outstanding debt. That didn't make any sense. I asked them to explain, and they told me I already had a mortgage for $360,000 on a property in Albany, 3 hours away from Buffalo. My stomach dropped. I hadn't bought a house in Albany. How could this even be on my record? I immediately pulled my credit report, and there it was, a mortgage loan in my name, approved just 6 months earlier. The payments were overdue, and I was listed as the borrower. I was panicked and confused. Someone had stolen my identity, and they'd done it well enough to secure a 6-figure loan. At first, I thought it was some random scammer. But as I dug deeper, I started to notice familiar details. The phone number on the application wasn't mine, but I recognized it. Same with the email address. They belonged to Zara. Zara and I hadn't been super close in years. She'd moved around a lot, chasing business schemes that never seemed to pan out. She'd always been good at charming people, though, and she'd gotten herself out of plenty of sticky situations by talking fast and smiling big. I called her immediately. "Zara," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "why is there a mortgage in my name?" Her response floored me. She actually laughed. "Oh, don't freak out," she said, like it was no big deal. "I needed a house, and I couldn't get approved. It's just temporary." "Are you serious? You stole my identity," I shouted. "It's not stealing if we're family. You'll never even notice," she said, still sounding like this was some kind of joke. "You ruined my credit," I yelled, completely losing it. "Do you know what kind of trouble this is going to cause me?" "Relax, Dale," she snapped. "It's fine. You'll never catch me anyway, so stop acting like a hero." She hung up on me. I sat there, shaking with rage. My own sister had stolen my identity, taken out a massive loan, and left me to clean up her mess. And the worst part? She didn't even care. She thought I'd let it slide because we were family. But I wasn't about to let it slide. The first thing I did was call the bank and explain the situation. They were sympathetic but said the mortgage couldn't just go away. They'd already flagged the account because some of the signatures didn't match, but the payments were overdue, and legally, I was still on the hook. I had to file a police report before they could take further action. Walking into the police station was nerve-wracking. How do you tell a stranger that your own sister betrayed you like this? I explained everything to the officer at the desk, and he passed me on to Detective Corbin, who specialized in financial crimes. Corbin listened carefully as I told him about Zara, the mortgage, and the phone call where she'd basically admitted to everything. He asked if I had proof, and luckily, I did. The mortgage documents listed Zara's phone number and email. Plus, I had screenshots of her text messages boasting about her new place in Albany. She'd even posted pictures of the house on social media, calling it her dream home. Corbin nodded and said he'd look into it. I wasn't sure how far it would go. Identity theft cases don't always lead to arrests, but I knew I couldn't just let Zara get away with this. Meanwhile, Zara was living it up in Albany. She'd turned her stolen house into some kind of social media shrine, posting photos of wine nights on the porch and backyard barbecues. She'd even named the place Zara's Chateau. Every time I saw one of her posts, it made my blood boil. She was acting like she was untouchable, like there wouldn't be consequences. Corbin worked fast. Within a few weeks, he'd uncovered everything. Zara had forged pay stubs, fake tax returns, and even created a fake ID with my name but her picture. Her boyfriend, a guy named Trey who had a history of fraud himself, was in on it too. They'd scammed the mortgage company together, and now they were living the high life in a house I was legally responsible for. Corbin called me into his office to go over the evidence. "We've got enough to charge her," he said. Hearing those words was a relief, but it was also surreal. This was my sister. We'd shared a childhood, holidays, family dinners. And now, she was about to face serious criminal charges. Corbin explained the next steps. They were going to arrest Zara, and I might need to testify if the case went to trial. I said I'd do whatever it took. Zara had made her choices, and she needed to face the consequences. A few days after my meeting with Detective Corbin, Zara was arrested. She didn't see it coming. Corbin and his team planned it well. They waited until she was hosting one of her famous wine and cheese parties at the stolen house. She had Trey and a bunch of her friends over, showing off her luxury life. The officers showed up, plain clothes, and walked right into the backyard. They approached Zara calmly and asked for her name. She was confused at first but didn't try to hide who she was. Then they told her she was under arrest for identity theft, fraud, and grand larceny. Her face went pale as she tried to laugh it off. "You must have the wrong person," she said, trying to charm them. But they had everything: her forged documents, her fake ID, the messages she'd sent Trey about their little scheme. When they slapped the handcuffs on her, she finally started panicking. "You can't do this," she screamed. "I'm his sister. This is a family matter." They didn't care. She was taken away in front of all her friends. Trey? He bolted as soon as the cops showed up. Coward didn't even try to defend her. After Zara's arrest, things started to snowball. The bank was finally able to take the house back since it was tied to a fraudulent mortgage. Zara's so-called chateau was repossessed, and everything inside it was sold at auction. Trey disappeared, probably off to scam someone else, but Zara was stuck in jail waiting for her trial. Mom was heartbroken when she found out what Zara had done, but even she couldn't defend her this time. The trial was intense. Zara tried to spin it as a misunderstanding. Her lawyer claimed she only used my name because she knew Dale wouldn't mind helping her out. She even had the audacity to say she planned to pay the mortgage eventually and that this was all blown out of proportion. But the evidence didn't lie. The forged pay stubs, the fake tax returns, the photoshopped ID with her face and my name, none of it could be explained away. And then there were her own messages to Trey. Corbin found texts where she literally said, "Dale's too stupid to notice. We'll be fine." That one stung, but it was also the nail in her coffin. The jury took less than a day to decide. Guilty on all counts. When the judge handed down her sentence, 10 years in prison, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, satisfaction, even a little sadness. Zara had done this to herself, but it still hurt to see someone I grew up with fall so far. The judge called her actions a calculated betrayal of trust and said she showed no remorse. I couldn't have said it better myself. Zara's sentence came with an order for restitution. She was supposed to pay back the bank and cover the costs of clearing my credit, which had taken months to fix. I wasn't holding my breath for the money, but just knowing she was being held accountable was enough. Mom took it hard at first. She tried to convince me to forgive Zara, but I told her I couldn't. "Mom," I said, "she didn't just hurt me. She could have ruined my life. She left me to deal with her mess without a second thought." Eventually, Mom stopped defending her. I think she realized Zara had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Over the next year, life started to go back to normal. The bank worked with me to clean up my credit, and I finally got the HELOC I'd applied for in the first place. Max and I started the renovations on our house: a new kitchen, fresh paint, even a little deck out back. Every time I looked at that deck, I couldn't help but smile. It felt like a symbol of victory, a reminder that Zara didn't win. People ask me if I feel guilty about turning Zara in. I don't. She stole my identity, wrecked my credit, and thought she could laugh in my face about it. She made her choices, and she paid the price. Family doesn't mean you get to treat someone like a doormat. As for Zara, she's still in prison. Last I heard, she's not doing great. Apparently, charming people isn't as effective when you're behind bars. Mom writes to her occasionally, but I've cut all contact. I don't hate her, but I don't trust her either. Some bridges can't be rebuilt. If Zara ever reads this, I hope she understands one thing: this wasn't just about the money or the house. It was about respect, trust, and accountability. She thought I wouldn't fight back. She thought I'd let her get away with it because we were family. But she was wrong. So, Zara, if you ever get out and read this, I hope you've learned something. I have. Don't underestimate the quiet sibling. And don't mess with someone's identity, especially if they have receipts.